Welcome back to World Religions. This video is about indigenous or native religions from around the world. 2.1 Introduction. We're going to talk about what indigenous religions have in common. First, a note on terminology. Indigenous implies native, the religion native to a given part of the world. This is in contradistinction from missionary religions, which are ones that deliberately try to spread themselves through missionary work, sometimes through violent conquest. Examples of missionary religions are Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. There's also the term folk religions, which imply informal, not codified, less organized forms of religion that are more integrated with the culture in general. They go along with customs and other informal norms. There's also the term primal religion. I know the religious studies scholar Huston Smith used this in at least one of his books to refer to indigenous religions. Smith was thinking of primal in the sense of oldest or original and maybe most fundamental. This term is not preferred by some modern scholars. I think they associate it with the word primitive, which implies less developed religions. You could say that these religions are more common among societies that are less economically developed. So traditionally they would have been hunter-foragers, or they would have been practicing small-scale farming, but not building big cities. Tribal religion, that term also used to be used, but the word tribe does refer to a specific type of population structure. So it's larger than a band or a village, but maybe smaller than a kingdom or tribal federation. So that term is less useful because the indigenous religions can be practiced by these cultures at various scales. The map on the slide shows the regional distribution of folk religionists as of 2010. The word folk religion is a bit broader than indigenous religion. It would include indigenous religions, but also various other informal traditions. For example, like syncretism between Roman Catholicism and native or African traditions that you sometimes see in Latin America and the Caribbean. There's a large diversity of indigenous religions because they're usually practiced just by a local ethnic group. So if you count up the number of separate religions in the world, most of them by number are indigenous. But most religious people are not followers of indigenous religions because each of those many separate indigenous religions has a small community of followers. If you look at human history, this was the way it was up until the advent of large-scale civilization and missionary religions, which deliberately tried to spread themselves to other cultures. In antiquity and prehistory, each ethnic group would have their own religion. So some of the common features of indigenous religions, their myths and rituals are transmitted orally rather than being written down. There is an emphasis on respect for elders, ancestors, and spirits. There is a sense of sacred time and space. They are often connected to the local landscape around them. Particular parts of the landscape may be regarded as governed by a spirit or as connected with actions and stories of the ancestors. There's often a focus on communal well-being, not just that of the individual or family, although that plays a role too. And they often have shamans or ritual experts who perform healing and divination rituals, and also can perform rituals to counteract sorcery or witchcraft. Sorcery or witchcraft basically means using rituals with the goal of harming or cursing someone. You can see on this map the indigenous religions are shown in light beige. So they take up a very small surface of the earth in terms of being the main religion in a given area. Most areas of the world, there's going to be a non-indigenous religion as the most common one. However, indigenous religions can show up in many places as minority traditions that are not practiced by the majority of the population. They can also be blended with other religions like Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism, for example. Indigenous peoples don't often have a concept of religion as separate from the rest of life or society. Religion is more integrated with the fabric of their daily life than in other cultures. There is an aspect of this even in modern societies where people don't always consciously separate or classify parts of their lives as religious. So they may pray in the morning or before going to bed without having the thought, oh, this is religion, unlike the rest of the day. Or they may participate in cultural festivals like Christmas or Easter that have a religious meaning, even if the person doesn't emphasize the religious meaning in their own lives or consciousness. Do note that a concept like religion can apply to people's beliefs or behaviors in terms of the meaning of the concept and the nature of their beliefs and behaviors, even if the people themselves don't have that concept or don't use it to classify themselves. It's a logical fallacy to say that because a culture doesn't have a concept of religion, therefore they are not religious. The question is just whether they do in fact engage in the beliefs and behaviors that fall under the concept of religion. This picture on the slide is an interesting map that shows the second most common religion by nation. So the folk religions are the second most common religion in several nations such as Brazil, Congo, and Burma. So the missionary religions have largely taken over the world. The modern world is dominated by a few major religions, including Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Of that list, only Hinduism is not a missionary religion. There are missionary sects of Hinduism, like ISKCON, or the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, popularly known as Hare Krishna. However, for most of its history, Hinduism has not been a missionary religion, unlike the others on the list. So those are the ones that have spread to countries and lands way outside of their point of origin. So Buddhism spread throughout Central, East, and Southeast Asia. Christianity throughout much of the world, and Islam is prominent throughout much of Africa and the Middle East and Central Asia. So indigenous religions originally were everywhere, and now they've been largely replaced by these various missionary religions. Sometimes indigenous religions may be combined with the missionary religion. Buddhism is more inclusivist and less exclusivist than Christianity and Islam, so it often gets combined with forms of animism or nature spirit worship in Southeast Asia, like in Cambodia and Thailand, for example. Indigenous traditions can also modify the way people adopt missionary religions. So they may interpret or practice the missionary religions in a way that's inflected by their cultural heritage. So, for example, using pre-Christian ceremonies to honor the Christian God or Christian saints or angels. Some indigenous religions have also modified or adjusted themselves in response to missionary religions. So they may borrow ideas or practices from them, like having a more explicit theology or believing in an all-powerful God as well as the other gods and spirits that they worship. So indigenous religions, if you look at it at the overall scope of history, they're largely going into decline. They may eventually die out. The most rapidly growing religions are fundamentalist Islam and Pentecostal Christianity, and they're largely converting parts of the world, like in Africa, that used to mainly practice indigenous religions. But it's also possible that they will continue to adapt and survive. Certainly there are some communities still passing the traditions down, but it does get difficult. Typically when societies modernize, industrialize, etc., the younger generations often lose contact with the traditions of their culture. There's a big emphasis in indigenous religions on practices like rituals and customs rather than doctrines like theology. Indigenous religions often consist of community rituals and stories without having explicit or codified doctrines, and this contrasts with the more explicit theology and metaphysics, or theory of the nature of being and reality, that you find in missionary religions. Indigenous religions have an orthopraxy, or a right way of performing rituals and customs, but generally lack an orthodoxy, or a set of correct beliefs about the nature of the gods and spirits, for example. There's a hierarchy of persons in indigenous traditions, and often the religious ceremonies and customs consist of ways of creating, restoring, or mending relationships with the different persons. The religious studies scholar Irving Hallowell coined the phrase other than human persons based on Ojibwe, a native North American tribe, to describe the concept of gods and spirits. The reason why you would want to adopt this kind of awkward phrasing, other than human persons, is, in my opinion, to kind of remind yourself that even though they're not human, they're supernatural, they're gods or spirits, they are persons, and so the way people relate to them can actually be similar. You see a common pattern of the way people would relate to human persons in indigenous societies and the way that they relate to these other than human persons. So some indigenous religions have creator gods, um, and these creator gods, even though they're the origin of the universe and maybe they have some kind of sovereignty still over everything, they tend to be more remote and less thought of, less interacted with, less sacrificed to than the other gods or spirits. The gods or spirits that are closer to nature and everyday life, even though they're not creators and in some sense less powerful, the more intimately involved in the lives and needs of the people. So those are the ones that tend to get worshipped or propitiated more. Other religions have many beings, several, who contributed to creating or maintaining the cosmos. In native North American cultures, you may see ideas of trees separating the sky and earth, so that's a cosmological belief. But also, there can be gods like coyote, jaguar, or raven, who are regarded as contributing to human culture by taming fire, teaching humans how to plant corn. Specifically, they're thinking of maize, which used to be called Indian corn, and performing ceremonies and even building towns. So those are the gods that are closer to human concerns, even though they're not creator gods. There's also typically a belief in many nature spirits who may be immanent or present in nature, such as in animals, plants, rocks, clouds, and so on. All of these can be persons. And this connects to the term animism, which is a term that would apply to most indigenous religions, worshiping many spirits of nature as being the main focus of the religion. There's a similar survival of this in modern Iceland. You used to be able to find beliefs like this all around the world, but it's been replaced or at least de emphasized by missionary religions. Apparently, some people in modern Iceland still believe in elves, or at least act and talk as if they do. And so they won't want to disturb or destroy certain stones or other natural features where they believe the elves dwell. So the way that people relate to these non-human persons can be similar to how they relate to humans who deserve respect, such as elders, priests, shamans, grandparents, rulers of a community, etc. There's also rituals honoring ancestors, some of whom may be alive, some of whom may be dead. And then the spirits of the dead generally could include non-ancestors that are still the deceased spirits of dead people. And then these beliefs about the ancestors can connect to modern disputes between indigenous communities and museums about human remains. It's a common belief among indigenous peoples that they and their ancestors have always lived on the same ground. Not all of them have that belief. Others may have stories of ancient migrations, but many do have that belief. And if that is their traditional belief, they may regard all human remains from that territory as being of their ancestors, even in some cases if you can demonstrate scientifically that that was probably not the case, like through archaeology and modern genetic studies. But the overall theme is one of the relationships between humans and God spirits, other humans, and nature. So a lot of the rituals of indigenous religions attempt to restore a sense of cosmic balance and harmony after maybe a disturbance of a relationship or some other disturbance like in health or something where the balance needs to be restored. Gifts play a prominent role in many indigenous religious ceremonies. Children are often taught religion by being taught how to treat just other persons generally. So the customs around gift giving can be used whether the recipient is a human or a god or spirit. And in fact, who is or what is given a gift can help define the bounds of personhood because of those parallels between giving gifts to elders, for example, and giving gifts to gods and spirits. In Ojibwe culture, children give elders gifts of tobacco, whereas the elders themselves can offer tobacco to rocks, eagles, and sage plants. So you probably already get the idea. There's a lot of overlap between the religion in indigenous cultures and their customs generally. This is true in all religions, but it's more so true in the indigenous ones. We can see other religions and traditions like Confucianism in China and Shinto in Japan. Shinto is a religion, but it's probably best regarded as a type of indigenous religion. In any event, there's a lot of customs from Japanese culture that are displayed in Shinto and vice versa. And Confucianism is kind of a religion, more so a philosophy. But Confucius himself thought that human customs of his ancestors should be the blueprint or the pattern to govern the society of his own time and later times. And yes, some of them do relate to religious rituals, but he kind of lumped religious rituals in with ceremony or custom generally as a way of creating social order and harmony. So the customs are often organized around showing respect to those with authority or status, like elders and gods. And there can be specific behaviors that you're supposed to show to respected persons. Like in Africa, it's customary to offer beer, including most commonly homemade beer, to guests and other persons you want to show respect to. It's also used during indigenous ceremonies. And there can be customs around greeting, such as shaking hands, pressing noses. They vary by culture, but the specifics of them display the nature of the relationship, like how intimately or reservedly to treat a person after just meeting them, whether to touch them, etc. So these are just examples of a type of customs in the human realm that can also carry over to the relationships with gods and spirits, including customs on how to present gifts, like whether they should be handed to people or placed on the ground, for example. Most indigenous religions have a concept of spiritual power. The word mana is often used by religious studies scholars. It's from the Polynesian language, and it's one of the first examples of this general concept or pattern that was studied by anthropologists. It's similar to the Ojibwe concept of manito, which the picture on the slide is of petroforms. This would be a place that's believed to have manito or spiritual power. You can find similar ideas in a lot of ancient cultures, like in ancient Egypt, they had the word Heika, which can be translated as magic or power, and in China, De, which meant spiritual power. Confucius also used it to refer to kind of like charisma or social influence or personal magnetism, but originally it had this more religious and ceremonial aspect to it. So earlier scholars, like going back into earlier in the 20th century, often regarded indigenous religions as just having primitive misunderstandings of mystical powers. Modern scholars, contemporary ones, like the last 50 years or so, would often emphasize that there's a social dimension that's at stake in a lot of the rituals and ceremony. And so maybe you could say there's real power dynamics going on, but the spiritual power may be used metaphorically or analogically to refer to social power dynamics. And power can manifest itself in these cultures as the ability to perform certain roles, such as being able to make pots or make speeches or other things like that. Nevertheless, I do think it's fair to say that there's a huge element of mysticism or magic in a lot of these ideas of power, because the power that the spirits have and that they can give you do things that would be regarded, at least from the modern scientific standpoint, as supernatural. And I say mystical because in order to get the power, you might have to have an altered state of consciousness, like by going into a trance or something like that, which relates to the word mystical and mysticism. So this kind of brings up the larger point, which should be a general theme in this class, that there are trends in scholarship. And the current generation of scholars always tends to regard its own understanding, or what is currently popular, as the objectively correct one, and looks down on previous generations. Though we should be skeptical of this. We should try to take a broader historical perspective and realize that the current way of looking at things shouldn't be privileged necessarily over that of previous generations. It's not that the previous ones necessarily had everything right, but that also applies to what's currently fashionable to believe. The word taboo is often used by religious studies scholars. It means a ritual prohibition. This one also comes from Polynesian languages, if I recall correctly. So here's a quote from the scholar Gerardus van der Leeuw about taboo. Quote, "Taboo is a sort of warning, danger, high voltage. Power has been stored up and we must be on our guard. The taboo is the expressly authenticated condition of being replete with power, and man's reaction to it should rest on a clear recognition of this potent fullness, should maintain the proper distance and secure protection," unquote. And that was from his book Religion in Essence and Manifestation from 1938. So the idea of taboo is related to that of spiritual power. Some things can have so much power in them or around them that they could be dangerous if approached in the wrong way. And so you could basically, if you disrespect the power or the spirit, you could be cursed or die or things like that. Another quote from the religious studies scholar Mircea Eliade, quote, "The elements of the taboo are always the same. Certain things or persons or places belong in some way to a different order of being, and therefore contact with them will produce an upheaval at the ontological level, which might well prove fatal," end quote. And that was from his Patterns in Comparative Religion, 1958. Shamans are ritual experts who can perform ceremonies that give healing to people, divination, which means getting access to knowledge, like telling the future or just getting access to hidden or secret knowledge, or giving advice or guidance on the best course of action. The rituals can give protection, whether from bad luck, misfortune, harmful spirits, or curses from other shamans or witches, etc. And also success in major endeavors like hunts, voyages, or even things like new businesses. Shamans can also be used to protect against witchcraft. Witchcraft can be defined variously, but it's often used to indicate something similar to sorcery, which is using ritual or ceremony to curse or harm someone. So the shamans can be regarded as giving protection or counter witchcraft, counter sorcery. Sometimes the same shamans might also practice what you could call sorcery or witchcraft when they're not helping people. If you have to distinguish between sorcery and witchcraft, sorcery would refer to actual shamans or other ritual experts doing curses, and witchcraft is the folk belief that there are such beings out there doing that. But oftentimes the witches don't actually exist except in the minds of the believers. Shamans must usually be trained through difficult or frightening means. They have a long initiation process. And they will often perform ceremonies involving sacrifice that can be used to restore relationships that might be damaged through slights, insults, or harm. The term shaman comes from Siberia, one particular culture from Siberia, but it's used to apply to similar ritual expert roles in other cultures. Male and female shamans are chosen by the spirits from certain families oftentimes and undergo rigorous training. In Siberian religion, they do believe in a high god who's beyond good and evil and the other gods. And the shamans will often talk about this high god, but he is less involved in their actual rituals and in the daily life in a manner similar to the way previously talked about for the belief in the creator god. So an ecstatic trance is often involved in shamanic rituals. The soul or spirit of a shaman leaves their body to communicate with the spirits, and then the shaman may bring back instructions to help restore the harmony between people, the spirits, and other parts of the natural world. So this practice is found among the Ainu, indigenous people in northern Japan, among indigenous Taiwanese people, and among the Hakka ethnic group in China, who have spirit mediums. Spirit mediumship is one function of shamans, but some cultures have spirit mediums in particular, even if they don't perform all the roles traditionally associated with shamans, where a spirit medium is someone who has the gift to communicate with spirits and who these spirits give the medium messages or even speak or act through them. The scholar Piers Vitebsky has studied Siberian shamanism extensively, and he has this to say, quote, being chosen by the spirits, taught by them to enter a trance and fly with one's soul to other worlds in the sky, or clamber through dangerous crevasses into subterranean worlds, being stripped of one's flesh, reduced to a skeleton, and then reassembled and reborn, gaining the power to combat spiritual enemies and heal their victims, to kill enemies and save one's own people from disease and starvation. These are the features of shamanic religions in many parts of the world, end quote. And I think this is just a nice, short, but vivid illustration of some of the beliefs, practices, and visualizations of shamans in many different indigenous religions. They often involve these extreme states or visions as their soul or spirit is going to the spirit world to get information, to conduct warfare, and so on. So indigenous peoples don't necessarily deny natural causes when they're talking about witchcraft or sorcery. Like they might acknowledge, yes, you caught this illness from this other person through, transmission of a disease, but the timing when that happened and why it happened to you as opposed to someone else, that could be due to witchcraft, or if it's a good thing, it could be due to the efforts of a shaman or a diviner. 2.2 Asian Indigenous Religions. This is a map of the predominant religion by subnational unit of lots of Asia, parts of Africa. The indigenous religions are shown by beige. You can see some of them predominant in southern China and in Southeast Asia between Vietnam and Thailand in the hill country. You can also see parts of central, southern, and eastern Africa that are predominantly beige or indigenous in religion. There are a wide variety of indigenous peoples in different parts of Asia. In India, for example, there are some small tribes in west central and southern India, and in Chota Nagpur. There's also the Andaman Islanders who live in an island chain off the coast of India. In Cambodia, there's indigenous peoples in many of the forests and coastal wetlands, such as the Khmer Low. In Indonesia, there are many hunter-gatherers in central Kalimantan, Celebes, and eastern Sumatra islands. In Malaysia, there are the Semang Negritos and the Senoi peoples, and these inhabit the jungle hills of the northern and central Malay Peninsula. In the Philippines, there's the Aitas Negritos of Luzon, Mindanao, and Mindoro. And in Siberia, there's also a large variety of indigenous peoples, including Buryats, Manchus, Nenets, and Tuvans. Each of these ethnic groups is going to have their own language and their own religion. What they often have in common, many indigenous peoples live in forested hills or other areas that are less suitable to farming. So that's why they were able to carry on more traditional ways of living, like hunting and foraging, or just being nomadic pastoralists with herds of reindeer or other animals, for example, in Siberia. They tend to be nomadic or semi-nomadic, and they form roaming bands within their territory. The groups vary in size and structure. They may consist of one elder and his extended family, or of several families. Foods often include roots, tubers, leaves, and fruits, speared or trapped fish, small game hunted by bow and arrow, or in the case of the Senoi in the Malaysian peninsula, they also hunt with blowguns and poison darts. And there's often strong norms about sharing food equally. So a couple of examples of indigenous peoples in Asia. The Senoi are an indigenous people who live in Malaysia. They base their living, cultivating, and harvesting on the land and the spirits. So in other words, how they make a living where they're harvesting, etc. It depends on their relationship with the spirit world. In terms of their food, they practice slash and burn cultivation, which means they slash down parts of the forest, grow crops there, and then move on so the land can recover. And they also practice hunting and foraging or gathering from the forest. So their settlements are semi-sedentary. They spend part of the year around their crops, and then they migrate to forage and hunt for the rest of the year. They live in a settled base camp during their season of cultivation and in temporary shelters during their foraging expeditions. So some of their main types of rituals include those associated with farming and healing sickness. The farming rituals are performed to seek the spirit's health to secure a good crop, and the whole community performs the rituals together. And an example of this is on the first day of planting their crops, all of the community is in quarantine or a kind of spiritual separation from the normal pattern of life. The rituals of healing are generally interpreted as involving a person's soul wandering away from the group during sickness, and thus the ritual's goal is to bring the soul back to accomplish the healing. A shaman will lead the ritual and use herbs and plants disliked by the spirits to drive away the evil and bring the soul back. They have many taboos or customs to guard against ritual impurity or curses, that type of thing. So if someone is sick, the whole group can be involved in taboos and ritual to help get through this dangerous period and overcome the illness. So they may spend days and nights in music and spirit-possessed dance to try to accomplish the healing. There's also rituals involving blood sacrifice, animal sacrifice, to drive the spirit out and cure the sick person. Deaths are regarded as potentially dangerous, just like births. If a person dies, then another set of pollution rituals begin. This is talking about spiritual pollution to avoid a type of spiritual taint, which could result itself in illness, death, or another type of misfortune. So the group will isolate itself for their own safety and that of their neighbors because they don't want the pollution to spread to other groups. And there's a belief that breaking taboos will result in terrifying tropical storms sent by some of their gods. The Senoi believe in many gods and spirits. The storm god is the one who sends storms, as the name implies, which is very important for their farming and their way of life and everything. But he's actually not the main focus of their worship. Rather, spirits that are more closely connected to the land and farming and ancestors. There is a lack of a strong hierarchy among the spirits. You often see this in animistic religions where there's just a plethora or a variety of spirits of nature, without some necessarily being regarded as outranking or more powerful than others, although it does vary. There's a belief among the Senoi that their safety depends on the unity and harmony of the living community. So the ancestor spirits don't usually participate in everyday life. If they do show up in an overt way, at least, that's often the sign that there's something wrong going on, spiritually speaking. The normal course of things is for the ancestors to be, in a sense, remembered, but as more of a vague presence than something actively interfering with daily life. Another Asian indigenous people is the Konds, who are from India. They're an example of a more complex tribe or ethnic group. They have larger scale social structures, so they may live in larger villages, not just smaller bands. They have a more settled and developed economy. They may practice farming, for example. And they also often have a stronger pattern of rituals or ritual specialists, although it's a matter of degree. The idea of the pattern is that there'll be like more of a class of priests or ritual experts who have a similar name, similar rank, similar title, maybe even similar dress, similar ceremonies, similar stories, etc. So the more kind of like regular and patterned it is, the more it reflects this complex social structure. There are rituals for the individual, like for healing, for example, but they can still involve the whole community typically. The Kond people call themselves the Kwe. That's their own ethnonym or name for their own ethnicity. They live in the jungle-covered eastern Ghat range of mountains of Odisha, India. There's over 1 million of them. Traditionally, they practiced slash and burn farming on hillside plots during the wet season, and then hunting and gathering during the dry season, which they call the hungry season. The two main gods in Kond religion are Bura and Tari. Bura is the male creator god who created the cosmos. Tari is the goddess of the earth. There's also a hierarchy of spirits below them. The high-ranking spirits include gods of the hill, of smallpox, a major disease, of boundaries between tribes and groups, gods of iron who are also gods of war, and gods of hunting. The lower ranking spirits include those associated with particular springs, trees, and lesser hills. There's often worship of spirits in sacred groves that are going to be sacred to the hill god or another guardian spirit for a community. The main myth is the story of Bura and Tari. So Bura created Tari as his companion, but she tried to prevent his creating the world and humanity. The world as created by Bura was originally a paradise, but Tari was jealous, and this led to fierce conflict between the two. Most Konds believe that Tari won that cosmic conflict, but she let Bura remain in second place. It was Tari who then taught the humans hunting, war, and cultivation or farming. But she demanded human blood or human sacrifice in return as her proper food. The Konds originally resisted this demand of Tari, but then she brought drought, famine, pestilence, and death to them, so they eventually relented. They no longer do this practice, but traditionally Konds did practice human sacrifice. So the human sacrifice ritual is called Mariah. It was first encountered by the British East India Company, which was ruling India at that time in the year 1835. The Konds traditionally believed that constant human sacrifice was necessary to satisfy the demands of Tari for giving fertility to the earth. She would only grant crops, animals, and even children in return for this human sacrifice. After the British banned the practice, the Konds replaced it with buffalo sacrifice. This ritual does still continue in Kond areas of India, but is declining. It's considered very taboo among Hindus. In the buffalo sacrifice ceremony, strips of flesh are taken from the buffalo's back and then buried in the village and in neighboring villages to help secure the fertility of the land. During this period of time, there's going to be a temporary truce while the rituals are being performed. This is largely ceremonial now, but historically there was very common warfare between different villages of Konds. This is a ritual that lasts 3 or 4 years, and each year one stage of the ritual is performed. Also, it can be celebrated not just in one village, but by all in a district, either annually during all the farming seasons, because different crops can be planted and harvested at different times, or when the health of the people or the livestock are affected, so kind of like on an as-needed basis. The ritual helps bind together the people as Konds. It's one of their most distinctive ceremonies. And this gives them a loyalty above the level of just their particular clan, but rather to the Kond ethnic group as a whole. The Mariah involves a wooden post. You can see a picture of one from a museum in India on the slide. Mystical powers are often used in Kond rituals to benefit either the individual or the group. The rituals can involve humans and the high god, or they can be involving the land. So a lot of the rituals follow the seasons, the farming calendar, when the ground needs to be prepared and planted, when it needs to be sowed and reaped, and threshing of the crops, etc. There's also taboo lifting rituals on hunting and gathering to mark off the beginning of that season when the farming season has ended. There's also rituals to seek the blessing of the ancestors. This may involve other clans, such as with marriages or when taking a second wife. as opposed to the ancestors just of a person's own clan. And the entire village may be removed and its ancestors, if needed, to solve the problem or the pestilence. So this is the idea of the land becoming cursed, and all the current and former inhabitants have to leave in order to get rid of the problem. There also are rituals to help safeguard life. This can be threatened if a person deliberately or accidentally offends powerful spirits like the gods of the hill, of smallpox, of boundaries, of iron or war, and hunting. There's also a belief in the evil eye. This is a widespread belief among many cultures, with the idea that certain people have the power to curse or harm others just by looking at them. And sorcery and witchcraft. Sorcery and witchcraft, as mentioned earlier, they overlap. They both involve performing rituals to try to curse, harm, or kill someone. And as mentioned also, the distinction between them is normally, at least the way it's used in social science, witchcraft more commonly is used to refer to a kind of purely fabricated belief in this practice. Like there's no actual witches out there. There's just people that are falsely accused of witchcraft, or there's a belief that the witches are out there even if they haven't been discovered yet. Whereas sorcery more often is applied to actual ritual experts who are performing ceremonies with the intent to harm or curse others. And keep in mind that the same person can be either a sorcerer or not, depending on the type of ritual they're performing. Like oftentimes it's the shamans who could also, you would say, practice sorcery if they're using their powers to curse. But more common is to use rituals against the evil eye, sorcery, or witchcraft. These are called counter rituals, and they're used by witch detectives. Those would be shamans specializing in trying to deal with the problems of these types of curses, or you could say harmful magic. Anything out of the ordinary course of life can be polluting spiritually, including both births and deaths. And the impurity can exist at many levels. So there's small things to avoid in a household to avoid a minor level impurity. Major level infractions like committing incest can pollute the entire earth around a village. There's a lot of practices connected with unexpected deaths, like deaths not from old age. The ones that are especially traumatic or polluting are tiger mauling. There are tigers in India which still kill people. Death during childbirth, hanging, falling from a tree, other accidental death, and drowning. The most polluting deaths can place the entire village in a spiritual quarantine for a month. Nowadays, the period of time is usually shorter. The priest and the people will then undergo daily purification rituals during the entire quarantine. There are different types of ritual experts in Kond religion. Seers or diviners are those who can communicate with spirits through trances or other divination rituals. They can figure out, for example, who caused a spiritual or other practical problem and why. Priests perform the rituals, including sacrificing cocks, goats, pigs, or buffalo. These are often performed with the entire community. Then there's the keeper of the village's shrine stones. This person is chosen by the spirits, and they perform the annual purification rituals on behalf of the village. The head of every household can also conduct the ancestor rites for their family or clan, and they may look after bronze emblems of animals, reptiles, or other household spirits. The picture on the slide is an artist's depiction of a Kond human sacrifice from the 19th century. The Kond people view the living as being part of one community with the ancestors and with the yet to be born. They also regard the daily activities of the living as continued in some form in the land of the dead or the world of the shades. So there's a variety of beliefs connected to the ancestors and the afterlife. There's a belief that death in old age with the full funeral ceremony gives the best hope of a peaceful transition to the world of the ancestors. And if any of those conditions are violated, that's when problems can emerge. The dead are rehabilitated through ceremony, and they re-enter the home of their family. And it's believed that a spider will be found near their funeral pyre, because the Konds practice cremation, and that spider is going to be the new manifestation of the dead relative or ancestor. A sudden or unexpected death will prevent the deceased from being accepted by the other ancestors. The deceased spirit will then become unbearably lonely and can be dangerous to the living. The afterlife, its method and manner, is determined by the manner of death. So if it's a bad death, or if the person performed evil actions when they were alive, that could negatively impact the nature of their afterlife. 2.3 Australian Aboriginal religions. There are many different groups of Australian Aboriginals. These are the indigenous people of the continent of Australia. Humans have lived in Australia for 40,000 years, according to modern scientists. When Europeans arrived in Australia, the land was sparsely inhabited by many different hunter-gatherer groups. You can see on the map in different colors language families of Australian Aboriginal peoples. These are not just individual languages, but whole families of related languages. So you can see there's a large diversity there. There's also two main groupings marked off by the red line. Some of those language families are in the Pama Nyungan group, and others are classified as non-Pama Nyungan. So each of these language families would have several languages in them, and each of those linguistic communities would have their own myths, stories, traditions, and ancestors that they worship. The main focus of Australian Aboriginal religion is stories about the ancestors and their relation to the land and its creation. So these can be described as totemic ancestors. They are god or spirit beings who are also regarded as the ancestors of the different peoples. They have supernatural powers. They're self-created, and they can create features in the landscape. These special powers could be used either for good or for ill. They once lay beneath the land, according to the myths of many Aboriginal peoples, and they rose up from beneath the land and journeyed across it or under it or over it. And along the way, they left various impressions on the land, like rocks, hills, or rivers. They also are the ones who created the laws for humans to follow. After their travels, they return to their homeland below or in the land. So some examples of features of the landscape that could be attributed to ancestors: a water hole where an ancestor stopped to urinate, then creating the water hole when they did so; a shallow depression where an ancestor had sat down; a rock where an ancestor had slept, laid out flat; ochre deposits, that's a natural pigment, where an ancestor bled; flowing water and springs where an ancestor had dug into the ground; and valleys where the ancestors had cut down trees. So the stories of their ancestors and their transformations of the land create a connection between all things in the landscape. All things are connected to the ancestors and to each other. Living and non-living things, like plant animals, but also the natural features. Conscious or sentient and non-sentient beings are all kind of connected through these stories. The picture in the slide is a modern trail marker showing the ancestor Waugal, whom the Noongar people believe created the Swan River. So there's a connection between the stories of the ancestors, songs about them, and art. The stories of the ancestors are connected to various rituals, forms of art, dance, and song. There's also the concept of songline, which is a set or group of songs that follow tracts of land pertaining to the journey of a particular ancestor. Each area of the land is associated with a particular species of animals, birds, and other phenomena. And a network of these tracts of songlines cover the continent of Australia and are linked together. So you can look at the path that the ancestor took and the various landmarks along the way in the series of songs that are about the formation of each of those landmarks. An example of an ancestor is Barnum Beer, the morning star, who's the creator spirit of the Yolngu people. And you can see the style of the art is very abstract, stylized, and geometric. That's common to the art of many Australian Aboriginal peoples. There's a term called the dreaming used by scholars, and it originates in the term Alcharinga, which is used by the Arrernte Aborigines of Central Australia. It was first studied in the late 19th century by Frank Gillen and Baldwin Spencer, who translated it as dream times. This is a past period of a vague and dreamy nature, but one still connected to the present. It later became known as the dreaming or dream time. This is the mythical past in which the ancestors acted, had their stories, their song lines, but which is still connected to the present day. Other Aboriginal groups, apart from the Arrernte Aborigines, have similar concepts. They may use specific names for the concept that corresponds to the dreaming in their own language, or they may call it the law. These stories are still connected to the present. So the dream time is in the past, but in a way it's still existing because the actions of the ancestors still resonate today. Access to the dreaming can be gained through ceremonies and through song and dance and through dreams. There are different levels of meaning to the stories about the dreaming. The public meaning is conveyed to everyone through communal ceremonies and publicly shared art. But a person's standing in their group determines their depth of understanding of the stories. So, for example, a given song or a painting on a rock can have layers of meaning. So there's three main levels of meaning. The public one that's shared by most of the people in the band or the tribe. The sacred meaning would have a deeper level. And then there's a secret level of meaning, not only to those who are initiated either into men's business, which is the lore that's retained by the men of the tribe, or women's business. And the picture on the slide is another rock painting, this time of the ancestor Bayame, who's the creator god of the Wonarua people. There's a concept of ownership in a lot of Aboriginal peoples of not the land, but rather of knowledge, that only certain people have the right, the kind of ownership right to paint certain designs, to sing certain songs, or to tell certain stories. And they get this by being initiated basically into this by certain elders of the community. There's also a phrase the Australian Aboriginals use, keeping up country, which refers to keeping up the customs and the traditions of their people. There's a sense that the people have a duty of stewardship or care towards the part of the dreaming associated with their region. So they have a duty to continue the rituals and to follow the song lines and to maintain the proper relationships with the ancestors of the place. An example of an art form that is connected to a lot of the stories is painting. There's a quote from an Aboriginal painter named Marika, quote, "I am not painting just for my pleasure. There is the meaning, knowledge, and power. This is the earthly painting for the creation and for the land story. The land is not empty. The land is full of knowledge, full of story, full of goodness, full of energy," end quote. So that shows you a bit of their thinking with regards to the art. It's not separate from the religion, from the stories, from the culture. It's all kind of connected. And finally, many Aborigines have converted to Christianity. They may use Aboriginal style art, like in the picture on the slide, to depict Christian beliefs, or they may mix Christian and Indigenous beliefs and practices. 2.4 South American Indigenous Religions. Here's a map of the prevailing religions by subnational unit. The red is Roman Catholic, blue is Protestant Christian. The beige areas are the ones where indigenous religions predominate. You can see also marked some of the indigenous peoples that are mentioned later in the slides. The YY on the north coast, the Baniwa in the Amazon, the Machi Guenga. These are basically east of the Andes Mountains, also parts of the Amazon River Basin. Further south, there's the Guarani, the Toba, and the Tehuelche. So these people, even though many of them do practice indigenous religions, they don't make up the majority in any of these areas where they gather their data. So not all of them show up on the map as majority indigenous. There's a lot of diversity within South American indigenous religions because there's a bunch of different ethnic groups, but there are some common themes. There is a general idea of a primordial past, a mythic period of momentous upheavals. So these are cataclysmic events like floods, fires, and various violent changes that reshape the cosmos. Some peoples regard the world as a deliberate creation of a god or gods, like among the Guarani. The god Tupa created the world, humanity, and Anga Tupiri and Tau, the spirits of good and evil, respectively. There's other peoples who regard the world as an unintended result, so caused by the god's divine or semi-divine offspring. So it's kind of like a byproduct of the primordial or original gods. There's often cultural heroes who mark the transition from the mythical prehistory, the stories of the gods, to human history. An example is Elal, the hero of the Tehuelche people. You can see the picture on the slide from a modern children's book about Elal, where he's flying on his friend Kukne the swan, after defeating his father, who was a giant named Nosithej. There's different cosmologies among the different peoples, indigenous peoples of South America. There tend to be multiple levels of the cosmos, but the number of the levels varies. Among the Machiguenga, there's three parts of the cosmos. The earth in the middle, and in between the heavenly world of the gods above, and the subterranean world below. The Baniwa have four parts in their cosmology. So there's earth, the underworld, and then a lower other world adjacent to the earth, and a more distant other sky. The YY people have 5 parts in their cosmology, and the Kogi have 9 parts. And there's also some peoples who divide the middle world laterally, so the other levels are vertical, but some would divide this middle world or earth that we inhabit laterally as well, such as the Ava Chiripa, who talk of a land without evil. That's a distinct part of the earth realm. There's also a place in their religions for sacred mountains, lakes, dense forests, and other mythical places. The physical and social spaces that they inhabit are often ordered to reflect the mythic cosmology and cosmogony. So, for example, villages of the Kayopo people are arranged such that the physical space of the village is a microcosm, both in its design and in its orientation. The picture in the slide is just of Cosmenk, who's a Soort or underworld spirit of the Ona people. It's a modern piece, but it reflects the traditional beliefs about that spirit. There's different views of the self or the person within South American indigenous religions. The general picture is that the human self is a microcosm or small world of the overall cosmic order or macrocosm. So there's often a view of multiple souls, or you could say parts or components of a self. The YY, some of the Guarani and the Toba speak of 2 souls. The Ava Chiripa, the Machiguenga, and the Guarani speak of 3 souls. The soul components can preserve personal identity during sleep or death. So, for example, the Machiguenga believe in a free soul that roams about while a person sleeps. Similarly, the Toba speak of an image soul that roams about while a person sleeps. This can also relate to the views of death. The YY believe in an I soul that ascends to the realm of Kapu at the time of death. This can also be connected to the trances of shamans, which are called soul flight by the YY. So one of the souls leaves the body. These various theories of the soul also allow for relations with other spheres of existence, both during life and after. There's a variety of supernatural beings in the indigenous religions of South America. There's often a belief of a remote deity that inhabits a higher level of the cosmos. They might be eternal and uncreated and pre-exist the cosmos. An example is Ko'och, the high god of the Tehuelche people. Another example is Nyanderuvusu or Tupa, the high god of the Guarani. There tends to be a pantheon of lesser deities connected to celestial, climatic, totemic, or other more everyday phenomenon, such as Karuten, the thunder god of the Tehuelche, and Pelek, the night spirit of the Toba. And there's also a variety of lesser spirits. These can be associated with animals, plants, elements like water, or deceased humans. These are the ones most commonly encountered. They can influence personal well-being, people's relationships, and society, etc. They tend to be morally ambivalent, not always good or evil. An example of one of these lesser spirits is Pombero, or hairy feet, a spirit of the Guarani people, who is believed to walk around silently at night, is an expert mimic, may pull pranks on people, or cause other problems. Most South American indigenous religions have shamans. Among the Baniwa people, they believe that serious illness is caused by spiritual assault. Spiritual attacks can also be caused by a sorcerer or shaman, or just by violating certain taboos, such as those connected to food, hygiene, or social. And so a shaman will be someone to help deal with the illness or the spirit attack. The general features of shamans are that they are the intermediaries between humans and the spirit realm, and they're the ones who perform the rituals necessary to set things right. They tend to be marginal figures. They're in society, yet they're outsiders because they're also in the spirit realm, and they have access to these powers that are different from those of the ordinary community. They're widely regarded as having the ability to cure illness. They also perform the focal role in communal festivals, such as those that mark the harvest, rites of passage of individuals into adulthood, female menarche, male coming of age, hunting, and they also will mediate political disputes because they're respected by various parties. So the knowledge of shamans can draw upon their initiation, apprenticeship, and then later practice. So they learn some things before being initiated as shamans. They have an apprenticeship period, and then they go into practice on their own. They will memorize the cosmic structures and realms believed in by their culture, and they often have techniques of ecstasy, dream, or visions that allows them to visit the worlds of the spirits and communicate with them. And they'll perform rituals of healing, communal rituals, etc. Some indigenous peoples of South America have multiple types of shamans. For example, the Jivaro and Wakuenai have 2 types. The Ishir, the Winikini Warao, and the Desana have 3 types. Some of the ways that the types of shamans can differ, whether they are one specializing in healing or harming, they may be able to journey to different supernatural realms. They may have relationships with particular spirits, or a type of shaman might be associated with a specific type of hallucinogen, like ayahuasca. The picture is of a Guarani half-moon altar built in an opi, which is a ceremonial or a ritual structure. So there's different types of apprenticeships among the shamans, but they tend to be long and arduous. Among the Putumayo people, the role of shaman must be inherited. Among the Abachiripa, future shamans are selected by the current ones. So the length and nature of the apprenticeship varies, but it can be long. The Machiguenga, Siona, and Chiquitano peoples have an apprenticeship for shamans of less than 5 years, but the Kogi, Aracuna, and Taulipong people have apprenticeships of more than 10 years. And these apprenticeships can involve isolation, periods of instruction, onerous, difficult ordeals, disciplinary regimes, marginalization from society, sexual abstinence, emetic purgation, narcotic disruption to their sleep, and hygiene. So these illustrate some of the ways in which the shaman is forced to live on the personal and spiritual margins of their society, but this is believed to increase their connections and power over the spirits. So shamans will often have relationships with particular spirits. Guardian spirits are allies to the shaman, and they may occupy the higher strata of the cosmos. They offer protection and information about the causes of illness or of a social disturbance. And a shaman will enter a dream, trance, or vision to communicate with them. An analogy that might apply here is the role of God and the saints in Catholic and Orthodox Christianity, including in the rite of exorcism or driving out evil spirits, because these are the beings that are called upon to assist in the ritual. There's also, in South American shamanism, auxiliary spirits. These are often associated with animals or plants, and they can reside within the shaman themselves, as opposed to in this higher realm. They play a diagnostic role, but also can help cure the illness or the problem. The shaman typically has a relation of reciprocal exchange with their auxiliary or helper spirit. The auxiliary spirit will receive hallucinogenic or narcotic agents, for example, tobacco or ayahuasca. If you have to make an analogy, this might be similar to guardian angels that, according to popular Christian belief, accompany individuals. But the shaman will have an active relationship with their auxiliary spirit or spirits and use them in rituals. So ritual exchange can involve tobacco or other ritual commodities, which varies by tribe. Also, chants and dances are ordered or framed around the ritual exchange between humans and spirits. The picture on the slide is just a modern depiction of Tao, the evil god of the Guarani, and Karana, a goddess whom he abducted. So I mentioned ayahuasca. This is a hallucinogen. It's used by some peoples in the Amazon and Orinoco basins, such as the Urarina. There's different plants used in hallucinogens in South American indigenous religion. One of them is Banisteriopsis caapi, a vine that's macerated and boiled alone or with other plants. This results in DMT, a psychedelic substance, and harmala alkaloids, which function as monoamine oxidase inhibitors, or MAOIs. So shamans will oversee the ceremony, which lasts for hours or overnight. The Urarina people also use a plant from the Brugmansia family, which can induce vomiting and hallucinations. So these are used to induce altered states of consciousness in some South American indigenous peoples, but most actually don't use these in their rituals. They may do other things to create trance or a vision experience. 2.5 Native North American religions. There's a lot of diversity in Native North American religions, just like the other areas we've been studying. You can see in the map indicated the main language families. And again, each of those language families is going to have many specific languages. And in general, each language group would have its own religion. There's been an overall decline in belief and practice among Native North Americans since the 19th century. Many of them just stopped practicing their traditions. Maybe they converted to Christianity, or just other factors that caused decline. However, since the late 20th and early 21st centuries, there's been more of a self-conscious attempt to revive those traditions. Many of the Native North American, also called American Indian youth, don't actually inherit, you could say, the beliefs and practices of their ancestors, but some do, and some people in the communities just make an effort to keep the traditions going. Within Native North American culture, there does tend to be a stress on tradition, the teaching of the ancients, and also of the living members of the community who are elders and who know more about the tradition. There's, as mentioned, a great diversity of religious belief, but you can make some generalizations about what a lot of Native North American religions have in common. It's somewhat convenient to categorize the beliefs by number. You can at least symbolically classify by ones, twos, threes, fours, and sevens. So that's what we're going to do, partly just as a device for learning. So what about the number one, or unity? Well, many North American indigenous peoples believe in a single great spirit. Their religions are polytheistic or animistic, i.e., worshiping many gods or spirits of nature, but many of them do have a notion of a higher power, you could say, often called the Great Spirit in English translation. Among the Algonquin people, they use the name Giche Manito, and Manito means spiritual power. Among the Lakota Sioux, they use the name Wakan Tonka. So Wakan is the spirit, and Wakan Tonka is the Great Spirit. As with a lot of the other indigenous religions we've been talking about, the Great Spirit, which might be regarded as a creator or kind of like ultimate ruler of the cosmos, is often thought of as more remote than the other gods and powers. And so it may actually be worshipped less or maybe invoked less depending on the ceremony. The idea of unity can also be connected to the circle. The circle is a basic shape in nature, like with the moon and the sun, the motion of the stars, the cycle of the seasons. So there's a big role of the circle as a symbol in myth, ceremony, art, and community organization. Now, this is by no means unique to Native North Americans. You can see similar ideas about the divinity of the circle in ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, and the ancient cosmologist Ptolemy, all of whom assumed that heavenly bodies like the planets and the stars must move in perfect circles. Even though that proved to be a false assumption, it shows the importance, the salience of the circle as a symbol in the human mind. So with regards to circle, you often have circumambulation, or walking around some focal object, often a sacred object, like a fire, a drum, or a pole. Now, this is a near human universal of having religious rituals involving circumambulation around a center point. It's not done in every religion, especially nowadays, but it's very common and may have been part of many or most human religions for most of our history. And the center of the circle can symbolize things like the source of creation or the Great Spirit. You can see in the photograph a sun dance among the Shoshone people, which illustrates the idea of the circle and circumambulation. So two, or duality. Again, this can have different meanings depending on the religion and the context, but the Plains Indians, such as the Sioux, for example, often traditionally used shields that were circular, that were divided down the middle, and this might have been a symbol of the duality found in nature. Well, what is the duality of nature? There's often pairs of opposites encountered, like dark and light, cold and heat, male and female, good and bad, etc. Arguably, among many Native North American cultures, the duality, the pairs, are thought of as complementary, not necessarily contradictory. And the ideal is not to destroy one and exalt the other, but to find a balance or a harmony between them. There can be a belief that the two aspects, the two sides or forces, are aspects of one greater whole or unity. This can be compared to Taoism with its theory of yin and yang, or the dark and the light forces in nature that have a dynamic equilibrium or balance. And you can even compare it, arguably, at least on the moral side, to the philosophy of Aristotle and Confucius, who think of virtue, moral virtue, as involving a type of balance of opposing extremes. So you can also see the idea of duality in many myths. There's a lot of religions in North America that have stories about twins, twin brothers who are sons of the same goddess, and it's just expressing that idea of a duality in the world. Some totems or sacred objects, often in the form of like a pole, totem pole, can express this duality. So in totems of the Pacific Northwest, the west coast of North America, you will often see two-headed serpents. And this is interpreted as one head punishing, the other protecting. So for example, the deity Sisutl of the Kwakiutl people. You can see similar dualities in divinities in the belief in the Thunderbird, which brings rain, but is both threatening with the thunder, but also caring and nourishing because of the rain allowing life to grow. And in ceremonies, there's a forked pole used in the sun dance, and this could also be a symbol of duality. The number 3 is often connected with the nature of ceremony. In terms of just the pure symbol, the triangle on a circle can be a symbol of the give and take and reciprocity. And that is also connected to the analysis of a so-called three-sided ceremony, where one side is the human's need, the other side is the heavenly power, the God or the spirit that's invoked. And the third side of the ceremony is what is the particular action or physical ceremony performed in order to establish that connection. So about the ceremonies in general, as in other religions, they can be for healing, for guidance or divination, like getting information about what the correct course of action is, or to accumulate spiritual power or other power. So a famous example of a Native North American ceremony is the rain dance performed among the Mohawk people. These were people in the northeast of North America. So if the grain, the corn, withers due to a drought, the community has to gather together and perform the rain dance, and then they will get the help of the thunder beings or the Wakinyan. And they will gather in the fields, the community, and they will sound their drums and shakers. So they'll do music and noise, and they'll begin dancing. They'll sing a prayer and sprinkle water onto the earth. And then the rains are supposed to come after the ceremony. John Lame Deer was a 20th century Sioux shaman who had this to say about ceremony. Quote, "When we killed a buffalo, we knew what we were doing. We apologized to his spirit, tried to make him understand why we did it, honoring with the prayer the bones of those who gave their flesh to keep us alive, praying for their return, praying for the life of our brothers, the Buffalo Nation, as well as for our own people," unquote. One thing to keep in mind about Native North American religion, this may not apply to John Lame Deer's quote, but a lot of it, or all of it, originally was an oral tradition. So the written records started to come after contact with Europeans and Americans of European ancestry in North America. So a lot of the knowledge that was recorded is maybe distorted by that lens of outsiders. And then also there can be factors of modern Native North Americans maybe unconsciously being influenced by Western or modern ideologies in articulating or explaining some of the traditions. And plus, like all religions, it is living, it does change over time. So keep that in mind whenever you're reading or hearing about Native North Americans. It can reflect a variety of other influences apart from the historical traditions. The number 4 is often associated with the four directions, north, south, east, and west. And this is interpreted as a four-sided structure of the world. And each of the directions is usually associated with the gods or the spirits of that direction. Symbolically, this can be represented by a circle with 4 points on a circumference. Like you can see the picture on the slide. Sometimes the directions are associated with those four colors: black, white, yellow, and red. Again, a quote from John Lame Deer. Quote, 4 is the number that is most sacred, Wakan. 4 stands for the 4 quarters of the earth, the 4 winds, seasons, colors, 4 things of which the universe is made: earth, air, water, fire. There are 4 virtues which a man should possess. We Sioux do everything by fours, end quote. So with the quartered circle, this is sometimes interpreted as the pattern of all ceremonies, a kind of cycle that you can find in the wheel itself, and also symbolizing the variety and the wholeness of life. So the 4 directions, they go apart from each other, but they also come together. There's a variety, but also a wholeness. So in many ceremonies among Native North American religions, they may burn sweet grass, drink water, smoke tobacco from a pipe, and each worshiper says, "all my relations," and that can go around in a circle. There's also the phrase, the great law of sacrifice, which can be interpreted kind of related to this because of the idea of the cycle of creation and destruction and recreation. So one being, for example, like an animal hunted, can die that another may live. And this is the connection of that pattern, of that cycle, can be interpreted as being similar to the connection of the 4 points into the one center. So this is analogous to belief in 4 elements in Greek philosophy. With John Lame Deer's quotation, I'm not sure that he would have invoked those 4 elements, earth, air, water, and fire, unless under Western influence. I just don't know. But that's a possible example of modern or Western influence on how Native North Americans might interpret or portray their traditional beliefs. They already had the sacred number 4, but connecting them to those 4 elements might have been a 20th century thing. And then also you have similar symbols of unity in other cultures. In traditional Chinese religion, there's 5 elements and directions because they also number the center. But it's a similar pattern or a diagram of the cosmos. The number 7, finally, is another one that comes up a lot. And in Western religions and traditions, like in Judaism, the number 7 is, historically speaking, taken from the 7 days of the week, which were taken from the 7 planets. I don't mean the number 7 itself, but the sacred significance of it. And the 7 days of the week are numbered after the planets, or movable, wandering is the literal meaning of the word from the Greek, celestial objects that aren't always in fixed constellations, but change their relative position in the sky. And in antiquity, they only knew about 7 such objects: the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets that are observable with the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. As far as Native North American religions, I'm not sure of the historical origin of the significance of the number 7, but it might be connected with the teaching staff that I'll explain in a moment. So what are some examples of the sacred 7s? The Sioux people have 7 sacred rites or rituals. The Ojibwe Midewiwin have 7 prophecies or fires. There are, in some traditions, 7 stopping places in the people's migration to the west. 7 grandfathers or most important ancestors. Cycles of 7 years, and cycles of 7 times 7 years. An example of this is the Anishinaabe, who have the 7 grandfathers. And they are interpreted, at least in modern times, as symbolizing the following 7 virtues: wisdom, love, respect, bravery, honesty, humility, and truth. So I mentioned the teaching staff. This comes up in the Ojibwe people. Their interpretation of the 7 grandfathers is connected to the teaching staff, which is placed in the middle of the ceremonial circles around which people might circumambulate, as discussed earlier. What is the teaching staff? Well, it's made up of 3 straight sticks that are bound together at their centers, forming a stable structure. So the tips of those 3 sticks, there's 6 tips, top and bottom, for each one, and those are interpreted as 6 points, standing for the 4 directions plus 2 other directions, the sky above and the earth below. And then what is the 7th? Well, it's the crossing point or intersection of those 3 sticks. The crossing point is interpreted as the center or the here and now, or even the self, the being of each individual in the ceremony. So this, I think, is a plausible origin of the significance of the number 7, not just for the Ojibwe, but maybe some of the other Native North American religions too. Among the Lakota Sioux people is a concept called Wakan, which means sacred or power. So here's a quotation from an early 20th century man named Sword, who was a medicine man of the Lakota Sioux. And the treatise it's from is called Wakan Tonka. Quote, "Every object in the world has a spirit, and that spirit is Wakan. Thus the spirits of the tree or things of that kind, while not like the spirit of man, are also Wakan. Wakan comes from the Wakan beings. These Wakan beings are greater than mankind, in the same way that mankind is greater than animals. They are never born and never die. Mankind can pray to the Wakan beings for help. The word Wakan Tonka means all of the Wakan beings, because they are all as if one. Wakan Tonka Kin signifies the chief or leading Wakan being, which is the sun. However, the most powerful of the Wakan beings is Nag Tonka, the great spirit who is also Takus Ganskan." End quote. And this was translated by Bert Means and appears in the book by J.R. Walker, The Sundance and Other Ceremonies of the Oglala Division of the Teton Dakota, which is originally published in 1917. So it's an older source. It also shows the variation among Sioux and how they talk about the Great Spirit. Some may use the term Wakan Tonka for the Great Spirit, but Sword in this quotation used the term Nag Tonka. And in the picture is a dream of a Wakinyan by the Lakota artist Black Hawk, and the Wakinyan is an example of a type of Wakan. And then a lot of Native North American religions have trickster figures, which are often shapeshifters. They can adopt human and animal forms, and they can be playful. They can play pranks or tricks on people, as well as helping them, but they're often regarded as helpers who taught humans lessons through their intelligence, through their craft. So they can be a figure similar to Prometheus in ancient Greek culture, who brought fire to humans. But they're more of pranksters or tricksters. So they can take the form of a particular animal. And the Native North American peoples in different parts of the continent would have a different animal they would often associate their trickster spirit with. So in the West and Southwest, it often appears in the form of a coyote. In the Southeast and among the Ojibwe people, it often appears in the form of a rabbit or a hare. In the North, it could appear in the form of a raven. And in the Northern Plains, the Central Plains, it can appear in the form of a spider. The Ojibwe people have a trickster god called Nanabozo, and you can see a petroglyph or rock painting of Nanabozo on the slide. This is the form of the hare or rabbit, hence the big ears. So like other tricksters, Nanabozo is a shapeshifter, and he does appear in both human and various animal forms. And according to the Ojibwe, he taught humans the names of things and how to fish, and also the art of writing. He also founded the Midewiwin, which is the secret society of medicine men or shamans among the Ojibwe. 2.6 African Indigenous Religions. African religion is, going back to antiquity, a mix. There are many indigenous religions practiced by peoples all around the continent. But going back to antiquity, there was also Christianity and later Islam. North Africa was one of the earliest centers of Christianity, both in Egypt and further to the south in Ethiopia, which still has many Orthodox Christians. There's also a large group of Coptic Christians in Egypt today, although they form a minority of the population. The majority is Muslim. Islam started to spread into northern and then western and eastern Africa as early as the 7th and 8th centuries AD, very early in the expansion of Islam out of Arabia. You can see on the map the green represents majority Muslim areas, purple majority Orthodox Christianity, red majority Catholic Christianity, and blue majority Protestant Christianity. The beige areas are the ones where indigenous religions are still a majority. And you can see they're pretty few and far between, but there are some of them. And there are smaller numbers of indigenous religion practitioners throughout much of Western, Eastern, Central, and South Africa. But Islam and Christianity are rapidly displacing the various indigenous African religions. The spread of Christianity was also uh, facilitated by European colonialism, which started in the 18th century and continued up into the 20th century. Going back even earlier, there were Europeans like the Portuguese sailing around the coast of Africa going back to the 1400s. But the large-scale conquest of Africa by European countries only started in the 17 and 1800s. Because of the prevalence of Islam and Christianity for a long time in different parts of Africa, and especially expanding both of them even more recently in the 20th century, the indigenous religions of Africa have been greatly influenced by them, going back centuries. Vodun is the religion of several West African peoples, including the Aja, the Ewe, and the Fon, in the modern nations of Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Nigeria. It is related to Haitian Vodou or Voodoo, which is a syncretic religion, or one that blends different traditions. Haitian Voodoo is a combination of West African Vodun, Catholic Christianity, and maybe some other influences too. The picture has a ceremonial dancer from the Vodun religion. So such dancers may garb themselves entirely from head to foot in garb symbolizing a particular god or spirit who kind of fills them, possesses them, and who they embody, at least ceremonially speaking. The Vodun word for gods is Vodun. So that means spirits or the spirits. And some of the main Vodun are Mawu, who's the moon goddess and also the creator of the world. Lisa, the sun god, who's a god of strength, the daytime, and also heat. Legba, who's the youngest son of Mawu. He's actually the chief of all of the spirits, and he's symbolized by an erect phallus, as you can see in the picture on the slide. He's also depicted there as having a pair of horns sprouting from his head. Another important divinity is Don, who's the rainbow serpent, an androgynous son of Mawu, that is, combining features of both or neither genders. And he serves as a messenger or intermediary between humans and the rest of the spirit realm. So he's very important for the ceremonial practitioners of Vodun. The Zong Beto are men of the night or night watchmen. This is a Vodun custom of the Ogu people of southwestern Nigeria. The men will enter into a trance and be possessed by spirits. And as usual with this tradition, they will don the ceremonial garb that covers them from head to foot and symbolizes the spirit that is possessing them. But they have a social role. They look for thieves and witches, those doing curses or black magic during the night. The Congo people are a Bantu speaking ethnic group in Central Africa. Bantu languages are a language family, and they occur over a wide swath of different parts of Africa, including the central, south, because they were a nomadic people who were able to spread quite far um, because their way of life was inherently mobile. They were also great warriors, so they conquered a lot of other peoples. An example of a Bantu speaking people from southern Africa would be the Zulu. The spread, by the way, of Bantu languages throughout the African continent is sometimes compared to the spread of Indo-European languages throughout Eurasia by ancient Indo-European speaking peoples who lived as nomads in the European and Central Asian steppes. So the word Nkisi is used to mean a spirit in the Congo religion, or it can refer to an object that contains a spirit, like an idol or an icon. The picture on the slide is of a female Nkisi. There's also the term Nganga, which means a diviner, or you could say a shaman, someone who is a specialist in dealing with the spirits. And they also have the term Simbi, which is referring to a water spirit. There's another concept in Congo religion called the Kalunga line or the Kalunga River. This is a watery border between the realm of the living, or Ku Nseke, and the spirit realm, or the land of the dead, Ku Mpemba. The diagram on the slide is a modern depiction of Congo cosmology. They call it the Dikenga cross. You can see in the center a horizontal line. That is the Kalunga line, or the Kalunga River. Above it is the physical world, or the land of the living. Below it is the spiritual world, or the land of the dead. However, I'm pretty sure that a lot of the other features of this diagram are modern. You'll notice that the 4 points and the circle, and even the colors and elements associated with each direction, is similar to that of some Native North American religions. So this is probably an example of modern people using concepts from other cultures to kind of reconstruct, but also to reinterpret traditional beliefs. I do think the cross as a cosmological symbol is ancient for the Congo, but again, the colors of each direction, the elements associated with them, and some of the other details, I think is a modern reinterpretation. The Yoruba people live in southwestern Nigeria, and their religion is centered around worship of the Orishas, or spirits. These are classified into 2 main categories. The Tutu are gentle spirits, symbolized by the color white, and the Gbigbona are bold spirits, symbolized by the colors red or black. They also have the concept of Orun, which is the spirit world and the land of the dead. You'll notice those are often associated together in African and a lot of other ancient religions. And they have a concept or a term called Osun Osogbo, which means a sacred grove. You can see a picture of a shrine at a sacred grove on the slide, and those are often located next to sacred rivers. A very famous Yoruba festival is called the Eyo Festival. This was traditionally performed to escort the soul of a king who had recently died to the spirit world, or the land of the dead. Nowadays, it's mostly just a cultural thing and or done for tourists, but it's still the most famous Yoruba festival. So there are a variety of Orishas. Olorun, or Olodumare, is the supreme creator who created the world and the other Orishas. The picture on the slide is from Brazil, which is in South America, not Africa. But the cultural connection is that there were Africans brought to Brazil as slaves originally, and they brought some of their religion and customs with them. The religion is not worshiping the Orishas is not widely practiced in South America, but there are a few practitioners, but mainly it's just like a cultural tradition or memory. So these are modern statues illustrating some of the Orishas. Obatala was an Orisha who was given the task to create the world, but got drunk on palm wine and later created humans instead of the world. Oduduwa was a divine king, and he was sent by Olorun to actually create the world after Obatala failed. He also is regarded as the ruler of the city of Ifa, which is a historical place, and Oduduwa himself may have originally been a historical person, kind of raised to legendary status. The Oshun is a river goddess, and you see a lot of river goddesses in this religion, often associated with the sacred shrines mentioned earlier. So moving away from Yoruba religion, we're going to move now to Southern Africa. So the term Sangoma refers to a diviner of several Southern African cultures, such as the Zulus. They practice healing, divination, and counter witchcraft, similar to that practiced by shamans in other cultures. There's also the term Inyanga, which refers to an herbalist. This is someone who specializes in making medicines from various plants and animal parts. So the term Inanga refers to traditional healers and diviners in Zimbabwe. These can be either male or female. They help people with a variety of problems like sickness, ensuring the fertility of crops, a death in the family, infertility, or even problems with school. So they operate generally through spirit mediumship, where the Inanga will be possessed by a spirit who tells them the source of the problem and how to deal with it. Their ceremonial dress often includes animal skins, a hat of eagle feathers, rattles on the legs, and a dark walking stick about 3 feet long with designs on the top. And there is a belief in the culture of some traditional people in Zimbabwe that the spirits, or at least some of them, live in what's called Great Zimbabwe. This is actually what gives the modern nation its name, but it was an ancient city or kingdom built of stone, the ruins of which still stand. Ancient in the sense of pre-modern, but it's regarded as having sacred significance among those who practice the traditional religion. Here's just another picture of the same Inanga. You can see some of his additional ritual apparatus, like there's a couple of small images and little vessels he uses, as well as a piece of fabric on which a lot of these things are spread out, and the ceremonial walking stick in the back. So that's it for our brief survey of indigenous religions. Next up is going to be part 3, ancient religions. Until next time.